It's probably been said to the point that it's practically comical. It's not exactly a hot take anymore, but last year was a rough one. It was rough on a lot of us. It was rough on practically everybody across the globe, which is kind of an impressive feat if you really stop to think about it. I mean, we've had situations in our lives that have affected us or affected our nation, but last year we experienced one germ shutting down the entire planet. It's impressive. At least I don't think maybe it hit Antarctica. I don't really know. Penguins, do penguins get COVID? That's not up for me to decide, to find out. But it shut down so much of everything. We couldn't go out. We couldn't go to restaurants. We couldn't go to movies. We couldn't go travel like we like to do. It just kind of created all kinds of just inconveniences for us. In some cases, we were just even too afraid to leave our home. It created such a mass-wide panic that toilet paper, for some reason, was gone for a respiratory illness. But, that's not up to me. While it was really hard to get throughout the entire year, I think probably what made it the most difficult for us, or at least where it was really highlighted that this year was tough, that came in the ways that we celebrated things like holidays or birthdays or things that we do. Like, I can't speak for you exactly, but I know that for myself and my family, a lot of the ways in which we celebrate things like Christmas or especially Easter last year were just kind of shifted all because of this pandemic going on. We didn't get to do the big family Easter like we usually do that's followed by a giant egg hunt that our kids can participate in. Instead, Mandy and I had to kind of figure it out and do our own little egg hunt for the girls, which wasn't as much fun. I mean, they got a lot more eggs than normal, but it wasn't quite as much fun as what it was. It also meant that, Mandy and I, we couldn't go take the girls to get their picture with Santa Claus, which means that forever there is always going to be 1 year in our collection of those photographs that is missing. I think it's going to balance out, though, because there was actually 1 year a few years back where we actually got 2, so I might just take a marker and change that. We'll see. But, that's something that I look forward to. I didn't get to do, and we didn't get to go places under normal circumstances during all these things. Part of what made 2020 so difficult for so many of us was the ways that it impacted our traditions. Traditions had to be put to the back burner. Things that we do year after year, or maybe even things that we've done generation after generation, had to be put off to the side. And it disrupted so much about it because we lost out on these traditions that we all love. Traditions are something that is a huge part of the human experience. It's something that all of us have. Each and every one of us in this room, you have traditions that you love in your family. I have traditions that I adore with mine. We all have these parts of us that are something special that we celebrate, whether it be something that we do on a yearly event like holidays, birthdays, whatever, or it could be a tradition that we even do on a daily basis, like maybe you just have a certain special routine in your morning, and that's what you do every morning. I recently discovered that that's been the case for me, that I have a specific routine because I tried to add something to it, and it's not going well. So now you're going to sit there all whole morning and wonder, what's he trying to add to his morning routine? And I'm just going to let you stew on it. Anyway, but we have these things, we have these traditions that are tied to special memories or warm feelings, or when we do them, we remember somebody special that's long since gone. We love these things that help us connect with the past. They help us just kind of come together and bind together as a family. They're joint experiences that we look forward to every single year. If we look at it, we likely have different traditions for different points throughout the year. I know for myself, the Christmas season always starts for my family the Sunday after Thanksgiving, because we're weird and we believe in celebrating Thanksgiving before Christmas. But that Sunday after church, my wife, my kids, and I, we spend the whole rest of the day getting our house just completely decorated for Christmas. And then we turn off every light in the house except for all the Christmas lights. We drink hot chocolate and we watch a Charlie Brown Christmas every year. It is my favorite tradition that we do. Or maybe you guys have special traditions that you do for things like birthdays, anniversaries, whatever. I know for myself, a tradition that we started back when the girls were just turning 1 is every year on their birthday, I make them pancakes. and I take whipped cream and I spell out what number it is on there. Maybe when they get a little bit older, they might want to shift it to bacon and eggs, and I got to get really creative with bacon. I don't know. But right now they really love Pancake Day, so it works out pretty well. But we have these different things in our lives that we hold on to, these traditions that we keep going on for various times and things in our lives. We even have different traditions here in the church. If you really stop to think about it, there are a lot of things that happen throughout the calendar year of the church, and a lot of them seem to happen almost every year. Things like Vacation Bible School or trunk or treats, or even traditions that just happen when we all get together. Things that happen almost on an every Sunday basis. There can be traditions that are elements of the service itself. In my last ministry, we had a tradition that we did every single Sunday, and it was just simply that the kind of mark that the service had started, it wasn't anybody got up and said anything. Somebody just came forward and lit the candles that we had on our communion table. And that was a sign to everybody that, okay, service has begun. And then at the end of service, as we were singing the closing song, they would come back down and turn the candles out. Just a small, subtle way that we did every Sunday. And there was one particular Sunday where we didn't have anybody lined up to do it, so it felt weird because service got started 10 minutes later when nobody realized, hey, the candles still aren't lit. Fun day. Sometimes our tradition in church can even be the order at which we do things. Last Sunday, I had to chuckle a little bit because we just, for, fun, I don't really know why we did it, to be honest with you, we moved communion to the end of the sermon, and I heard a lot of you as we were getting started fumbling with your communion stuff, and I couldn't help but chuckle at you. And then who knew that one Sunday of throwing that off, it would throw me off the next week, so that's fun. But anyway, we have these different things and these different traditions that are all throughout the church. Some of these traditions have been going on for years and thousands of years, even in the history of the church. Some of them have just been taking place right here in our own church. They're just little things that you and I have come up with and developed as we go. And I want you to hear me say before we move any further, I want to make sure that you understand that I'm not saying any of these traditions are bad or wrong. None of these traditions are a bad thing in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I love a lot of the traditions that we have together. I love a lot of the traditions that the church as a whole has. But sometimes, if we're honest, we probably place traditions a little higher up on our priorities list than what they need to be. Sometimes we put too much emphasis on our traditions. We get kind of bent out of shape when things get moved around or when things are slightly different than what they normally are for us. We kind of get upset when things aren't going the way that they normally do. And unfortunately, if we're not careful, if we get so hung up on these traditions and whether or not they take place, we can honestly miss out on something incredible and really kind of miss out on what the purpose of the church really is, to see lives transformed in the name of Jesus Christ. It's something that plays out in our text today. We're going to be in Mark chapter 3. We're going to be looking at verses 1 through 6. So if you got your Bible, go ahead and turn there. But as you're turning there, I want to make sure that you understand you and I are not the first people who have ever accidentally misprioritized traditions over what the church should be prioritizing. In fact, it's something that's been going on for generations. And we see it take place in this text today. Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Here's what it says. It says, Jesus entered the synagogue again, and a man was there who had a shriveled hand. In order to accuse him, they were watching him closely to see whether he would heal him on the Sabbath. He told the man with the shriveled hand, "Stand before us." And then he said to them, "Is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil, to save life or to kill it?" But they were silent. After looking around at them with anger, he was grieved at the hardness of their hearts and told the man, "Stretch out your hand." So he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. Immediately the Pharisees went out and started plotting with the Herodians against him, how they might kill him. Now Mark, at the beginning of this narrative, he kind of starts off by giving us three things that are going to be really important for us to keep in mind as we continue to talk about this narrative. 3 points that are something that are significant. It kind of sets the stage of what is going on here. The first one that he tells us is that we are outside of the synagogue and there is a guy there who has a shriveled hand. That's an important thing for us to remember. The second thing that he tells us is that the Pharisees and the other religious leaders were watching Jesus awfully intently, looking for some way to accuse him. And the last part that he tells us, and it's probably really, to be honest with you, the most significant of the details, the one that's most important for us to keep in mind, is that this all takes place on the Sabbath. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with Sabbath or anything like that, but if you're unfamiliar, let me give you some idea here. For anybody who practices Judaism, particularly in this time, and still to this day, to be honest with you, anybody who practices the religion that we refer to as Judaism, like Pharisees and Jesus, the Sabbath is a very important day through the week. It's actually established by God in Exodus chapter 20, verses 8 through 11. I'm not going to put that on the screen. It was too long. I'm sorry. But it says, "Remember the Sabbath day. Keep it holy. You are to labor 6 days to do all of your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You must not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female servant, your livestock, or the resident alien who's within your city gates. For the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them in 6 days. Then he rested on the seventh. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy." It's kind of understandable why they would make this such a significant part of their practice. I mean, it does make the top 10. It's part of the 10 Commandments that God laid down and handed to Moses. So for the Pharisees, for the religious leaders, for the folks, again, still to this day, who practice Judaism, the Sabbath day is meant to be a day of rest. It's supposed to be a day where you just kind of take off work and relax a little bit. But that's really about all that the law has to say on the matter of the Sabbath. I mean, there's a couple other places where Moses more or less reiterates what was said there, but that's really about it. Just take a day and rest, don't work. It's as simple as that. But over the course of time, members of the Jewish faith began to kind of ask a question amongst themselves as they were looking for the best way to follow this law. They wanted to make sure that they were following the letter of the law as closely as they could, so they asked a simple question. Well, what constitutes as labor? What could we possibly, when we say the word labor, what do we mean in that? They wanted to make sure that they were following the letter of the law to the perfectness that they possibly could. So they began to come up with ideas. And these ideas eventually turned into traditions that were practiced every week on the Sabbath. Some of these made sense, like, don't work, or, make all the food you're going to eat on the Sabbath the day before. That's kind of stuff that made a little bit of sense at least. But some of them got a little extreme. Like they actually had a tradition that dictated you can only walk so far and not a step more, because if you take one more step, then that's no longer a relaxing walk, that's working. Or things like, you can't, to this day they still have some that say you can only use so much toilet paper in a day. That's a weird one. There was one that even said you can't write more than 2 letters in a day. So if you wanted to write 2 members of your family, you can write to one, you can't write the other one. There was even a debate going on at this point in time in Jesus' ministry that was a question that was being asked, is it lawful to eat an egg that the chicken laid on the Sabbath day? Look, I understand that they're wanting to follow through with what the commandment says. I get that, and I can appreciate that. But I think we're splitting hairs here, guys, aren't we? And I want to remind you of something before we continue to move on, and that's simply that none of this was listed in Scripture. None of these things that they practiced in the Sabbath day, none of them were actually part of what Moses had written down in the book of Exodus. Moses kept it pretty simple. Work 6 days, take the 7th off. Rest. Don't work. That's it. But for these people, they developed these traditions and they added on to them as time went on, and it was passed down after generation to generation to generation. So when Jesus walks into the synagogue area on the Sabbath day, and there's a man there with a shriveled hand, the Pharisees are all looking at him because they say if he's going to heal him, well, then that's technically laboring on the Sabbath, is it not? So they're watching him ever so intently. And I think the fact that this guy is at the synagogue, this makes sense, to me at least. See, because remember, this guy has a shriveled hand. That means that one hand does not open the way that it's supposed to. That means that probably the muscles in that particular hand have not developed the way that they should. And this is a time period where pretty much every job is manual labor. And this guy has one hand he cannot use. And we've talked about this before, but guys who had physical disabilities in this time period, they were really limited to about two different things in their lives. One, they could hope to have a family member who cared enough about them that they would provide for their every need, to take them under their house, to give them everything they need to survive throughout the rest of their lives. Or the second option, and this was probably the more popular, they had to go and beg. And this guy, being here at the synagogue on the Sabbath, well, that's probably the best time ever for him to beg. He's hitting him on their religious day of the week. He's outside of where they gather for their religious services. Maybe he's really hoping the priest that day is going to talk about generosity. So he's out here on purpose. He's likely been out here, if not every day, then probably every week, hoping that somebody can give him something to carry on throughout the day. And so when Jesus walks into this area, he sees this man. And he immediately knows what's going on in his life. He immediately knows the pain that this guy has had to be in, the struggle that he's had to endure just to make it to this far in his life. But he also sees the Pharisees. And he knows exactly what's going on in their minds too. He understands what they're trying to do and where their priority is in this particular moment. And so Jesus kind of starts everything off. We see at the end of verse 3, he tells the guy with the shriveled hand to stand before us. For a second there, just kind of picture what this guy is feeling right now. He's just been told by one of these rabbis, these teachers, hey, go and stand in front of the entire class. I don't know if you remember back when you were in school, but whenever you had to go to the chalkboard or the blackboard or whatever it was you had to go go do something, it's a little nerve-wracking, right? Because you have the entire class looking at you. And I just put this together, but kind of like how all of you are looking at me right now. Tells this guy to go and stand before them and to just kind of stand in front of them. And under normal circumstances, knowing what we know about Jesus, we would kind of assume that the next thing was he was just going to go ahead and heal this guy. But that's not what Jesus does. At least not right away. He does something that's a little out of the ordinary here. After he tells this man to go and stand before all of them, he turns to the rest of the Pharisees and scribes, and he says what we read in verse 4. He says, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath or to do evil, to save life or to kill? That is such an interesting question, don't you think? It almost feels out of place in this whole story that Jesus would take this moment to stop and say, hey, is this okay? Is it okay to do something that's good on the Sabbath? Is it okay to do something that's going to be restorative to this guy? In essence, what Jesus has done here is he's kind of given them a moral dilemma. And so it's kind of understandable why the verse ends with, they were silent. Because if you answer, there's a good chance you're going to be wrong, right? So he's hit them with this moral dilemma, and he kind of scans the whole room, scans the whole area, looking at each and every person right in the eyes. And verse 5 tells us exactly what he sees. Verse 5 tells us that he was grieved at the hardness of their heart. Jesus knew at this moment the Pharisees valued following their traditions more than seeing this man be healed. They valued following the tradition of the Sabbath more than seeing this guy's life change. They clung to their traditions so tightly. They wanted to make sure that everything was happening the way it's supposed to. More than they thought seeing this guy, who many of them likely have seen before, Again, not necessarily every day, but probably most days. Certainly every Sabbath, they've seen this guy. They've probably talked to him. Some of them have probably even given this guy some stuff. But in this particular moment, the Pharisees placed too much emphasis on their traditions rather than seeing the life of this man transformed. Jesus tells the guy to stretch out his hand anyway, and I love that Mark gives us the detail that his hand was completely restored, that it was actually brought back. Like, complete restoration doesn't just mean he was for the first time able to stretch out his hand. It actually means that the muscles that were there began to get stronger. That all of a sudden his one hand was just as strong as the other one. Do you understand what Jesus has done in this particular moment? He has completely changed this guy's life. Because now, for the first time ever, this guy can go and he can get a job to provide for himself. He doesn't need to beg anymore. He doesn't need to be reliant on the kindness of strangers. He can go and take care of himself. And that's something that I think you and I all value in our own lives. So it would make sense that we would value it for this guy. He's excited, right? His entire life up to this point has been one way, but in one moment of meeting Jesus, his life is completely different. His first encounter with Jesus, everything is different. His whole life has transformed. And so when we see this happen and the Pharisees see all this play out in front of them, you would think that their reaction might be a little different than what it ends up being. You would think the Pharisees would go, "Man, what a blessing. Can you believe this? This is so cool. We get to see this guy's whole life changed because of this one encounter with Jesus. How could you not love that?" But that's not how they respond at all. Instead, Mark tells us in verse 6 that instead they go off and in their anger try to plan how they can get rid of Jesus. They were so caught up in the traditions that had just been violated in their minds. Again, not the law. That's not what Moses said. But the tradition that they've carried for generations and generations have just been changed. And they're mad. So mad, in fact, they miss out on seeing God transform this man's life. They miss out on the coolest moment this guy has ever had in his life. Completely. Because they were so caught up in their traditions. They missed out on seeing transformation. Once again, folks, hear me. Traditions are not bad things. That is not what I'm saying at all. There is nothing wrong with you and I practicing the various traditions that have taken place in the church for thousands of years. There's nothing wrong with us carrying on the traditions that are unique to Macedonia Christian Church. Nothing in the world wrong with them. But if we place so much emphasis on our traditions that we miss out on seeing the transformation that Jesus can make in the lives of other people, we missed it entirely. We missed the point of what it is that we're supposed to be. What we're talking about this morning is if trying to keep our traditions in their proper priority. And that's a hard thing for us to do. It's a hard thing for us to reorganize our priorities in such a way that we value seeing transformation over traditions because we get so comfortable with our tradition. We get so wrapped up in the things happening in the way that they're supposed to, in the order that they're supposed to take place, that we get upset when they're violated and we miss out on seeing God doing something very significant in the life of someone else. Jesus did not call his church to be rich in their traditions and practices. He called us to take his gospel throughout the world and witness lives being transformed by it. Lives that were going in one direction until this one point where they meet Jesus for the first time, where they hear his gospel and they hear the message that he has, and it completely changes everything else. That is the point of the church. That is what we are meant to be about. That is who we are meant to be. And if traditions become more important to us than that, or worse, our traditions get in the way of that, then it's probably time that you and I reevaluate our traditions. Because if our priority is not seeing lives transformed, then folks, we might as well just close the doors. Because if our priority is just making sure that these traditions that have happened for generations keep going and they get in the way of seeing people transformed in the name of Jesus, then we're not the church that Jesus came to establish. How different do you think that this story would have been if the Pharisees could have put their own egos aside and put their own messed up priorities to the side and instead taken a second just to celebrate with this guy? Just to say, you know what, Jesus, you were right here, man. This is so cool. This guy that we've all seen, maybe this guy that many of us have talked to and developed a relationship with, we now get to see his whole life be different. That's incredible. It completely changes the whole narrative of the story, does it not? So what do you think would happen if the church prioritized seeing transformation over tradition? If instead of seeing our traditions maybe have to shift a little bit or change a little bit or maybe even get pushed aside, and all in the hopes that we get to see lives transformed, what if we celebrated that fact? It's hard. It really is. It's very difficult for us to even get comfortable with the notion of seeing a tradition that we've carried for our entire lives change. Because we get so used to it, we get comfortable with it. We have things, good memories and good feelings tied to it. And we don't want to see that interrupted. And folks, again, for the 100th time maybe, these traditions are not bad things. The traditions that the Pharisees carried about the Sabbath, they weren't bad things. Some of them were a little odd. The chicken one especially kind of, I don't know, when I first heard that just messed me up for a week. But they weren't bad. It's when they prioritized those traditions to the point that they missed out on the transformation. That's when something was off. That's when they missed the point entirely. And folks, I pray that for us, that would never be the case. That we get so wrapped up in our own traditions that when something happens that changes that, we get upset and we miss out on seeing the ways that God is transforming the lives of those around us. I don't want to miss that. Because that's the whole point of why we're here. That's the whole point of what the church is meant to be. Paul writes in 2 Corinthians 5:17. He says that therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away, and see, the new has come. Folks, traditions in the church are great. But they're not what the church should be all about. We're called to be the ones who lead others to Christ, to see them become that new creation, to see them transformed. Church is about transformation, not tradition. And if we are foolish enough, I dropped that big word there. If we are foolish enough to lose sight of that for any reason, then we failed. Absolutely, take part in the traditions of the church. Absolutely, see them happen every Sunday if at all possible. But don't cling to them so tightly that you lose sight of the transformation that comes from others encountering Jesus. Because you might just miss out on something really incredible.